All right. Hey, everybody. I do believe we are live on YouTube. And this is the, I think, fifth copyright conversation that we're going to have. We may have one or two more after this. These are public conversations that we're just live streaming for folks to join in and or listen in. You know, you feel free to join in on the chat in YouTube. These are open-ended conversations. I told these guys before we went live. They asked, like, is there a goal here? Like, what do you want people to come away with? And I said, I'm here to learn. What I do know is that no one seems happy about copyright, no matter who you are. It's like, or what perspective you have, something is off and you're not particularly happy about it. And so after having multitude of conversations about this with people who are just like, this is not working, I thought, well, let's start talking about it and just see where it goes. And so today we have representatives from various congregational song publishers. We've got representatives from Hope Publishing and GIA and Integrity. And between those three, that's a whole lot of congregational song coming your way. They're three of the big players when it comes to hymns. And really, I mean, if you open a hymnal or if you go online to search for things, you're going to come across songs from these folks. So they've been in the business for a long time, and I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves. So why don't we go in that order? Scott, we'll start with you with Hope, and then our GIA folks, and then Jonathan at Integrity. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Scott Shorney. I'm Vice President of Hope Publishing Company. I run the business with my brother John and my cousin Steve. So we're a three-headed management team and fourth generation of Shorneys to run Hope Publishing Company. My personal responsibilities here are all things copyright and all the legal stuff, business administration, while my cousin Steve is our marketing person and my brother John develops new products.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alec Harris, and I'm honored to serve as president of GIA Publications, also fourth generation family business. I've been at GIA for about 30 years in different roles. I'm also honored to serve as the head of One License, and we can have that conversation too a little bit if we need to. GIA is a major publisher of congregational singing, of hymnals, of resources, mostly used in the Roman Catholic community, but also the mainline Protestant community. We have about, 14,000 editions in our catalog and a wonderful staff, and look forward to talking a little bit more about it, but I'll turn it over to Kyle.
Thank you, Alec. My name is Kyle O'Cawthorn. I am the permissions editor for GIA. That also includes Walton Music. We have a number of choral titles in that, as well as a few sacred music pieces in Walton. So I do all of the incoming permissions and licensing. I also handle some royalty administration. And I've been with GIA since 2012.
Thanks, GIA folks. Jonathan?
Yep, Jonathan Lane. I'm the Senior Director of Music Administration and Contracts for Integrity Music. I've been here since 2001, so a little over 20 years. And what I do is I oversee our global copyright, licensing, publishing, royalties, contracts, all that stuff for our US and UK offices. And we have an office in Brentwood, Tennessee, and Brighton, UK on the coast, south of London. We have about 22,000 song copyrights and about 60,000 sound recording copyrights that we look after. And we just look after all those IP things, copyright things, and all that.
All right. I was just talking to a reporter earlier today about a song that Integrity administers the copyright for, In Christ Alone, having its 20-year anniversary. They're doing an article about it because it's 20 years old. Because I was looking up details before the interview, and I thought I should familiarize myself with things, and I saw Integrity right at the bottom. I was like, didn't know that. Well, thank you all for being here. Here's the first. Well, I forgot to give my disclaimer. I told all of them this before we went live. If I disappear for a second, it's because I'm on dad duty. I have a 3-month-old daughter who's just behind this door with my son. And if she becomes distraught, then I will just disappear and just take care of her and be back. I may be back with a baby, who knows? So please, I appreciate your patience with my family duties. All right, so the first question that I'd love to just throw out there to you all is for you to articulate the purpose of copyright law. Like, how would you tell people, if someone asked you, how would you articulate the reason why we have copyright is important or why it exists? What would you tell them? And that's an open-ended question to any of you.
I can maybe jump in and folks can follow me as
Yeah.
well. So, copyright is actually enumerated in the United States Constitution from our founding days. It's something that our founding fathers believed was important. It's part of the creativity that I think has driven much of the success of our country and the world. It is part of a continuum of rewarding folks and protecting folks so that they're inspired to create wonderful content, in our case, wonderful Christian songs for the broader church community. And copyright is what enables them to be rewarded financially, be inspired to want to create more, and also to support churches and for churches to be able to draw from all that wonderful creative energy. So I think when it's done right, it's a win-win for ultimately the folks who want to sing the music that we publish, and for the composers who create that wonderful music and get rewarded for that creativity.
Yeah, I agree with that. To put it in just kind of like general terms of why people get to hold the copyright or maybe turn it over to a publisher to administer for them. It would be the same thing if you built a house. You're the one who invested the time and the creativity into creating that house, and you get to live in it. And other people can't just walk in and say, hey, I'm going to take this room. It's your house. And when you create a song, it's your song. And you're the one who gets to reap the benefits of it, decide how it gets used. And copyright is just the law that makes that all possible, to protect your intellectual property.
Anything to add there, Jonathan or Kyle?
No, I agree with that wholly. I mean, I think it's not perfect, the copyright law, the way it is now. But it should be a delicate balance between the rights for the writer and the access that it grants to the user as well. Because without both sides of that, it really doesn't work. The rewards can't be given to the writer without the access to the public.
I would only add that we think of ourselves, or at least I think of my role, as sort of a go-between, as the publisher representative, that we are seen as the responsible stewards of something that's entrusted to us by our composers and our authors. So we want to provide fair and reasonable compensation for the use of their musical works, but at the same time, especially reasonable with reasonable rates to the folks that use our music.
So this is Clara.
Hey there.
And she's going to hopefully just eat this bottle. So the second question I have for you all is, how much of your company's time, energy, or resources are put toward negotiating, administering, or otherwise dealing with copyright issues? I think this is a big mystery for a lot of folks, even composers who have things copyrighted. I have some things copyrighted with a publisher, GIA to be specific. And I still don't have a very good feel for how much time and energy your staff and company takes in this process. Could you walk us through that?
I mean, for us, I mean, we employ, including myself, 9 people full time that we deal with copyright licensing stuff every day, all day. So, and then we're a company of about 30 people. So 9 people out of that It's dedicated to that every day.
So 9 out of 30 full-time employees.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hefty percentage.
Yep. It's really important.
I think we have about 3 full-time folks that specifically focus on the copyright aspects. But I would say that certain folks in our editorial division, they're preparing the contracts. So they're looking after things that are sort of in that front end. As we're preparing a work for publication. But you think about the term of copyright, it's a long time. So we're going to be looking after that particular piece or those works by our composers for as long as we own them. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. This isn't just a one and done. You sign the rights away to us, and that's that. We're always making sure that it's used appropriately.
Right. We have here, I probably spend half my day every day dealing with that, with licensing and contracts. Bernice is our copyright administrator. She's full-time. That's all she does. And we're producing licenses every day. We're sending out new contracts to writers almost every day. Quarterly, we pay royalties. Writers usually get paid annually, but other companies get paid on a quarterly basis, and that process can take weeks. So when you're doing it every 3 months and it's a couple of weeks to get it done, it takes up a great deal of time.
My wife and I worked at Choristers Guild for a while, which is a church music publisher, not so much with congregational song, but with choral anthems. And she did the royalty processing and oh man, that was not one of her favorite parts of her job. Let me tell you.
One hymnal may have 1,000 different copyright holders in it. And so when you sell each one hymnal copy, it has all those royalties have to be split 1,000 different ways. So it's a lot of administration. We have a front office too that does a lot of that. But it's there are certain standards out there. So it's not like every single agreement with every single composer has to be reinvented from scratch. And we want to make it easy. So, I think that a lot of times the question might be, why would a composer want to go to a publisher to have them administer their copyrights? And
I asked that in one of our earlier copyright conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone, but, we believe that, obviously a publisher will be there long after a composer has moved on. We'll be shepherding that. We'll be responsible for it. We'll be a place where folks can come to get that work. We'll be there advocating for it out there into the broader community. So we'll make it look as good as it can. We might invest in a recording or a beautiful engraving. We'll register the copyright. So it's we'll try to get it used around the world, not just in a local community. So it's so I believe very strongly that publishers create a lot of value for composers, and we bring a lot of good and awareness to their work. And we also do a curation. We don't just take everything that comes our way. We like to do our own discernment about what we think is the best music that's being composed or available to us. And so we hope that folks trust a company like Hope or Integrity or GIA, that if it's published by one of us, that it will have a certain level of quality and a certain level of trust that we've all built up over the years. And so it's again, it's part of that continuum of that copyright system that we think, or that I think, if it functions well, and obviously Jonathan alluded to it, doesn't always function well, it's to the benefit of everybody, and a system that works. Just like there's book publishers for books, or home builders and mortgage companies for homes, and what's what we do for music.
We've mentioned a couple times the length of copyright. So when something is copyrighted, and this came up in our last copyright conversation with the intellectual property lawyers, they talked about how over the years, the length of a copyright has constantly been expanded. And I was just reading the Copyright Modernization Act, which is being implemented as we speak, or maybe it's fully implemented at this point. I'm not sure. And that once again dealt with the length of copyright. With there were some very specific instances of what they were adjusting. But I wonder, over the years, because some of you have been with your companies for quite a long time, has administering copyrights gotten easier or more complicated?
That's a pretty easy question to answer. Much
Yeah.
more complicated because of the different types of uses you now have. So, and as far as the term of copyright, so probably the best example anybody could give is Greatest Thy Faithfulness, which was a Hope copyright 1923.
Mm-hmm.
It just went into the public domain at the end of 2018 after 95 years of copyright protection.
So if you've wanted to arrange that, now is your time.
As long as you're in the United States and Canada. You can ask Jonathan, because he just asked for today for permission to use it in the UK. Because it's still by their law under copyright there.
Right. International
So,
stuff.
so the term is a very complicated thing, but the older the copyright, the more differences and changes it went through. Things created today that are copyrighted actually, probably last 20 plus years have life plus 70 so life of the oldest living writer credited on the work plus 70 years past their death. The concept there is it supplies income to their heirs for approximately their lifespan. So that's the thinking. It was not an American idea. It came out of a treaty that was signed, international treaty that was signed. So the US law was changed just to come into compliance with the treaty that we had signed. So that's
that was an international movement that actually we adjusted to.
Yes.
Well, and so if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like copyright law is one thing, but then they change it, and then they change it, and then it gets changed. And because of all those changes, depending on where a song or when a song was created, then you have these layers of complications.
Sure.
And so part of the difficulty on the publisher side of things is just keeping track of all of that.
Right. I think a bunch of us through the organization we belong to, the Church Music Publishers Association Action Fund, were lobbying for copyright back when the Music Modernization Act was being passed. And I remember members of Congress telling us, we've negotiated, we've done everything we've done with the financial meltdown and collateralized debt obligations and financial reforms. And I'll tell you, music copyright is more complicated than all of that. And I don't know if he's right or wrong, but what I do know is it's our job as a publisher to understand all of that, to grapple with it, and to try to make it really easy for churches to use our copyrighted material to the best way that they can. And that's one of the things that we do.
So what, for those of you out there, there's this organization, just like any other professional organization, all the church music publishers have a body and they have a lobbying arm. So, well, tell me a little bit more about that and maybe specifically about the Music Modernization Act. How you mentioned that organization was a part of lobbying, I assume, for those changes. Was that something that the organization deemed successful, and why is that?
Well, I can start. Yes, that act was passed unanimously by the House and the Senate, and that never happens. And it was something that that everyone wanted. The tech industry wanted it, the publishing community wanted it, composers and authors wanted it, because it was clear that the copyright law wasn't really written with technology in mind. And we had to correct for that. And so a lot of folks got a little bit, and we came up with this Music Modernization Act law. And the CMPA was involved in lobbying for that because honestly, we're not Disney. We're not, some, international mega company that owns movies. We're mostly small businesses involved in church music. So I think folks in the broader copyright world look to us as an organization with a lot of integrity, with keeping in mind really the interests of church users and singers. And I think that they feel we bring a lot of, I think, a foundational weight to issues about copyright. And this isn't just about protecting Mickey Mouse. This is really about protecting a broad ecosystem of many, many thousands of individual writers. And I think they see us as a way to kind of tie into some of that.
Right. And as part of that, CMPA Action Fund lobbying arm is kind of joins together with all these other organizations like the National Music Publishers Association, which represents all the secular music publishers. And obviously that is a much bigger group of publishers than the church music publishing side. So while we're a very small organization compared to the people we join forces with, we bring a unique perspective to the table and are very welcome by those other secular publishers to join in with them.
Well, that's great. I bet a lot of people learned a lot just now, like that this exists and that people are doing this work. That's awesome. Jonathan, I want to ask you this next question. Although after he takes a stab at it, feel free to jump in as well. I'm just going to read what I wrote here. It's question number 3. Who is the copyright police? Every so often, we at the Hymn Society or the Center for Congregational Song will get folks emailing us, and they'll say, this person's breaking copyright law, or they'll have questions about that, and I get to say, well, we're not the copyright police, and since the U.S. doesn't really have a centralized agency to enforce any of this, does that fall to you all to enforce copyright, or to if someone's really doing something egregious to be like, hey, stop that? Do you deal with that, Jonathan?
Oh, all the time. I find that phrase funny. It makes me chuckle. The copyright police. When I started, the guy who hired me the first day gave me a plastic police badge and said, "Welcome to the force."
That's awesome.
And, he said it with a grain of salt, but we get those questions all the time. And we get those emails. So and so is using this song. Go get them. And who's the copyright police? I mean, it really falls on the owner of the song, the administrator, and in a partnership with the creator, the writer. Sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's not. But how you approach it, I think it's all about perspective. I mean, when I started, I was probably a little more gung-ho about those sort of things than I am now in my mid-40s. I'm a little more, mature as a believer in the way we approach it. We're not for profit ministry. So the way Integrity approaches everything is kingdom first, ministry first. What's our end goal at the end of the day is to glorify God and raise up his kingdom. And so approaching those situations, we keep those things first and foremost. We don't let someone just steal a song and run away with it, but we try to find a way to resolve the situation, allow them to still use the song if it's possible. It's not always possible, but we don't just go after it with cease and desist or litigation. We try to work out a solution and trying to find a way to help the song be used the way it was intended.
That's interesting. This came up in the last conversation we had with the IP lawyers. I asked, do these things show up in court? And they said, actually, that's part of the problem, is that there are basically there's no precedent in the court systems on most copyright law when it comes to especially when it comes to church music and church stuff, because people don't have the finances to go through, a multi-year litigation process concerning they copied 10 choral anthems or something, right? It's just not worth it. So the financial bit is there, but also I feel like, people who are in church music, generally speaking, are not super quick to drop a cease and desist order or take people to court, because we're all trying to glorify God here. Like we're trying to worship, and I feel like, but then what happens is it doesn't go through the court systems. And so we get all this nebulous law that's never been litigated. And we have these huge question marks. I'm sorry, I'm getting back into the IP thing, but that's interesting that I'm seeing all these interwoven relationships. And Scott and
Sure,
Alec and Kyle, similar experiences.
yeah, first of all, we're very lucky as church music publishers, and that our audience are churchgoers and church musicians, and they're trying their best to follow the law. And the law is complicated and keeps getting more and more complicated as churches start streaming their services because there's a pandemic. Things changed rapidly. And so the two things that I think that all church music publishers are trying to do is to help educate people on what you can do, what you shouldn't do, and make it easier for them to do the things that they are allowed to do, which is why CCLI and one license exist. They've taken the biggest chunk of what churches need to be able to do with the music they want to use and made it possible. So the first thing any church should do that's trying to figure out how do we follow the law is figure out what type of license best serves your needs and covers most of what you're doing. And then what's left after that, that's the last piece you got to figure out yourself. But, I think Alec would agree with that. It's all about helping people understand how to do something and then make it easy for them to follow.
Right. I mean, it's our job as publishers to be stewards of copyrights, and absolutely that's our job. But there is no such thing really as a copyright police, Brian, as you said, that doesn't exist. But as both Jonathan and Scott said, we want to help do two things. We want to make it affordable for churches to do what they want to do with the music they love. We want to create a way for creators of that content to get compensated for that wonderful music. And we want to make it simple and easily digestible, easy for folks to get what they want and do those wonderful things. So that's kind of our job as a publisher. And, if we're out there cracking that whip and filing lawsuits and everything, it's a lose-lose. We want to create a win-win. We want to make an ecosystem that works for everybody and a continuum that works for everybody.
Well, I want to ask then, in the grand scheme of Christianity, we're talking about a very, very recent bit of history, right? I mean, really over the last 50 to 100 years, where a lot, especially when we start talking about like YouTube and like streaming. I mean, this is so new. Everything seems to be moving so rapidly, and the law is struggling to catch up. Has the CCLI, I think, is not even 40 years old. Is it? It's about 30 years old, maybe. And one license is what, 20 years old at this point?
About that, yeah.
Ish. Has that helped you as publishers? Has the creation of those types of organizations, because there are a few more other than those two big ones, has that made your job as publishers easier? Or is it just has it just made the end users? I think it's safe to say that it has made it easier for church musicians and pastors to do the right thing
And
without as much research.
It's made it much easier for the publishers, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree.
That's good to hear. That's great.
We get very few direct church contact now with, just calling up and saying, hey, I just want to put this in my bulletin. Can I get a license to do that? The
First
thing I
30
always
years
say
ago, you would have gotten a lot of those.
Yeah. Do you have a CCLI or one license?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh yeah, we do. Well, that's covered under that now. So you're all set. Just make sure you report it when it's your turn.
I also think that in a way, just looking at how income to composers has changed over the years, the licenses from these licenses, the revenue from these licenses has grown very significantly. But on the other hand, other things like CD sales has dwindled to nothing. And, of course, it's very, very difficult. I think a lot of folks might think that, there are thousands of composers out there who can just retire on their royalties. And it's just not the reality. And and they're doing it just because they love what they do just as much as everyone else. But I mean, they do want to be compensated. And I think that's fair. And so what we're talking about is a lot of, these licenses really do every year, it seems like, take up a bigger and bigger percentage of the royalties that go to these wonderful artists and composers. And so it's enabled this wonderful kind of framework or system to continue and be strong in the post, CD and, era. And so in a lot of ways, I think composers have been very thankful to have something like that.
Jonathan, when it comes to recorded music, I know Integrity does a whole lot of that. And I know in the Music Modernization Act, one of the things that they tried to address, and that seems to be being implemented, is a way to actually compensate producers through the royalty system. And I wonder if that has changed the way that you're going to be doing copyright as far as albums that are put out where a producer would actually be a part of the system, or if you're going to just kind of stay with a flat fee or, hourly charge and then they're done.
Well, the way Integrity's always operated, we've always compensated producers with a royalty. There's been rare cases where we haven't. So we kind of are already in line with it.
Oh, that's great.
The way we operate. So I wouldn't, so yeah, we're not really affected by that much.
Okay. See, that's something I was not familiar with until I started reading the Modernization Act, which I'm still trying to figure out. And it's all a bunch of mumbo jumbo that I'm trying to wade through.
I think the thing that I think is most valuable about the Music Modernization Act is it's going to ultimately be a wonderful database where folks can find songs. There are all these songs out there that maybe have been lost or fall through the cracks, or people just assume that they can't find it. And so them working on creating this master database of songs and who administers them is going to be a huge help, I think, for everybody.
And I read that you have to register your songs with that into that system. So is that something the publishers are going to have to do, or are you working it out to where, since everything is already under one license or CCLI, that they would then just kind of forward that information into the system?
No, we're registering everything directly with them.
Okay, so each publisher is going to be taking care of that individually. That'll be fun.
I would just add to this. I had a webinar yesterday actually with this organization, the Mechanical Licensing Collective,
Nice.
And just specifically about the metadata, how that's, how there's all this data, not only just the title and the composer, but all of these other tags, essentially identifying factors of, how they can track how these songs are used in the various streaming services, Pandora, Spotify, etc. So it's critical for us to give them as much information as possible so that they can find all of our works and pay the appropriate person. So it may be in most cases it is the publisher that is doing this work, but there are folks that are completely independent. They serve as the songwriter and the publisher, so they're doing that work themselves. But for us, for our purposes, it's essentially the publishers or the administrators that are doing that.
This wasn't one of the questions I punted you all ahead of time, but I just started thinking about it, and it is something that I've come across as an end user, as a church musician. It's also a question that I've gotten as the director of the Center for Congregational Song. It's how do you know the difference between something that's copyrighted as far as I wrote this song, so it's copyrighted to me. Like I'm the author, composer, songwriter, whatever. And something that is a song that is copyrighted per the performance. Like so and so wrote the song, but Chris Tomlin covered it on this album. Is the song copyrighted twice? And if so, then how do we use that? Like if we want to show that and actually do the right thing, how do we handle two different copyrights as a church musician? And how do you handle that as publishers?
Right. So every song, you might see circle C under it. That's the underlying song. And the circle P is the recording of the song. So if you're using the recording of that song, it's best to go to the record label, whoever owns that circle P copyright. And if it's just the underlying song, you would go to the circle C. So most folks in a church situation are not using master recordings, but maybe you will if you want a background music or something like that. And so that's a whole nother, there's certain licenses for that that CCLI or one license can provide, but most people want the underlying, at least in my experience, the underlying copyrighted song.
I think this is a relatively new phenomenon for people on the end user, church musicians and pastors because of the pandemic. The use of YouTube recordings of certain performances and things like that has become much more popular with
Right.
live streamed worship. Okay, so look for the circle P or the circle C.
Right. And that's what Jonathan at Integrity is doing is with his recordings that's your main business is master recordings that get played on the radio that people reuse in church services and streaming services like this. And that's just a huge difference between what Jonathan does and what I do. Is Hope is a print publisher. We do own Circle Ps, but they're demo recordings for promotional purposes. We don't sell CDs. We don't for listening CDs we don't put songs and try and get them on the radio. We are providing print music for churches, and some of that's congregational and some of it's non-congregational. So the keyboardist, the choir, the handbell choir. And what we do though is we use Jonathan's songs and we use Alec's songs in our publications. And this was a question that came up in the first copyright session where the church musician from Texas was saying, sometimes the publisher isn't the copyright owner. What's the deal there? And for Hope's standpoint, that's about 50% of what we do is use someone else's copyright in our publication. Because if Jonathan has a hit song on the radio that everybody really likes, but you go to a church that doesn't have a praise band, you have a choir or a handbell choir, we'll take that song and arrange it for that type of instrumentation so that the church can still hear the song, but through the musicians that they use in their service. And so Jonathan will license me and we'll turn it into an SATB choral with handbell accompaniment, and it'll get used in a Presbyterian church in Iowa where they don't have a praise band.
So there's a lot of inter-publisher business going on behind the scenes, which is why then you can get the fine print can quickly start expanding beneath uncertain permissions. Sure. Gotcha. All right, let's jump into question number 4, which is, and we've already somewhat dealt with this as far as looking back on what has been done, but is your company or any of the organizations that you're a part of on behalf of the publishing industry involved in any current efforts to change or influence copyright law? And if so, what are you working towards? Or is it top secret?
The Music Modernization Act passed. It's the law of the land. And I think we're all working towards implementing it the best that we can. And that's really where most of our effort is. I don't think there's any significant legislation happening in Congress right now that would really be impactful to the church music community. That being said, there are certain things we may do or we'd stand ready to be in sort of supportive, but it's just not where Congress's priority is right now, and that's okay. Let's make the Music Modernization Act work to the best that we can.
Yep. And you had mentioned that the term of copyright keeps growing. I would say that I do not see that changing in my lifetime again. I don't think there's a valid reason to change it, and I don't think that people really, publishers would expect it to change. The forces that were driving it have, it's kind of reached its peak, in my opinion. It was clearly, as Alec has mentioned, Mickey Mouse a number of times. That was one of the driving forces behind extending the copyright law, because Mickey Mouse was under copyright and soon to go into the public domain if the law wasn't extended. So it didn't just apply to music, it applied to all types of creative things, movies,
Sure.
stuff like that. So, but I think that now that we're in line with the rest of the world, there are still certain countries that laws are different.
Sure.
The UK law differs from ours in that they made everything Life Plus 70, regardless of whether it had already fallen into the public domain or not. They brought it back if it had, and under the new law, it was now copyrighted again. Where the US said, anything that's already in the public domain stays. But things going forward can get this new protection.
And I mean, that's a long time, right? It's life plus 70.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds like a conviction sentence. So what's the rationale behind, or is there a rationale behind that length?
I said it before that the most common one that is mentioned is that it's for, so that if you create a work, you have the rights to it for your lifespan plus the lifespan of your heirs, your offspring. So roughly 70 years is an average lifespan.
So let me ask then specifically about Creative Commons. It's a relatively new phenomenon in the grand scheme of things. Some people don't even know it exists. I love Creative Commons as someone, like when I'm looking for graphics or something to use, I'm like, Creative Commons, click. But I don't see that as something being used at all within the publishing industry. And I'm wondering what you all think about it. Are there uses of Creative Commons within your industry, or is that something that you don't like at all? Or
Well,
yeah.
what I know of Creative Commons is basically a way for folks easily who have created something to define what uses they'll allow for it to be reproduced for free versus which uses that they want to protect. And so for us as a publisher, we're looking to take full advantage of opportunities for our composers. So we wouldn't avail ourselves of that because we have our own contracts and our own language and those sorts of things. But I can see that for an individual who maybe just starting out, to use that as a way to just get something out there in the world, that's great. And it makes it very easy for them. And then I've seen things go off of Creative Commons when publishers take it over. And I've seen, and there isn't just one kind of Creative Commons. So we've gone into things and said, okay, we want to license this under Creative Commons, but then they don't allow commercial uses, and we're a commercial entity. So,
right.
So it's not even in and of itself super simple. There's a lot of different versions of Creative Commons.
Yeah, right. Because there's like different categories that you can classify it under, and
right.
Yeah. Jonathan, I wonder about Creative Commons specifically in the relationship between, I mean, with things like recordings. I'm not aware of very many artists who make any kind of a living off of the recordings. Like, they get their check from YouTube for 10 cents after 10 years or whatever. And I wonder if that is something that anyone has considered as a way of kind of just simplifying things for church musicians and churches to say, these parts of the song, such as like this recording is Creative Commons, but for the print, we're going to keep it copyrighted and you have to pay for that in order to actually use it. Is there a way there to simplify things, or would that just be another way to muddy the waters?
Well, I think it would have to be somebody who's independent to do that. Like a company like us, we spend thousands of dollars to record a master, and something like that wouldn't be financially feasible
Right.
for us. So it'd have to be somebody probably independent, doesn't pour a lot of money into their recordings.
So then, I mean, I'm curious about this. On the publishing end of things, I hear artists all the time talk about how little they get compensated for Spotify plays. I mean, it's made big news too in the secular industry. I mean, there've been people who have been raising a big stink about this. I mean, it strikes me that if it were more profitable to create recordings, that we would have more high-end recordings of church music and congregational song in particular. I feel like congregational song, because no one's in it for hardly anyone's in it for the money. It's really hard to find like good recordings of hymns and other songs that are being recorded, other than just the kind of the select few that get chosen, like this is going to be the moneymaker. Could you talk about that a little bit? Are there limitations there that you feel like you're being held back?
Well, streaming is definitely a challenge. It's been a challenge for all of us on this call the past, I think, a decade probably, when streaming came about, to figure it out how to make it profitable, shifting from a physical industry to this digital one. And even with COVID, it kind of pushed it forward a little faster than anybody anticipated. I mean, we've had to get really creative on how we create recordings ourselves since COVID became a thing. We've gotten a little more lean, a little more creative. I mean, we've done several recordings in the kitchen of some of our artists, being a little more intentional with what we do record, less filler stuff. A lot more video content because things have shifted to be more visual now. So it's all intentional. So I think it just depends on who you are, what resources you have, and what your intention is, and how finding the best way to steward those resources to get the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing for us. I mean, recordings, as Jonathan said, can cost thousands of dollars. Videos can cost even more. And it's very hard to recoup those expenses given the current environment that we're in. And that's why folks have turned to licensing services like CCLI or One License. And if it weren't for some of those opportunities, I don't think that a lot of what happens out there would even come to fruition. So, I think that the thing to keep in mind, I think from an end user's perspective, is we're trying to make everything as affordable and easy as we possibly can. We want to work with you. We want to respond. If there's Kyle is, as you can see, he's a wonderful person to connect with. I think he only wants to help. We are not the copyright police. We want to make things as affordable and reasonable and appropriate as we possibly can for you. And I'm sure it's the same with Hope and with Integrity. And we're here to serve you, and if you're not happy, then we're not, then it's going to make things more difficult for us in the long run. And obviously there are blatant violators, and all of that accepted. But if you want to do the right thing, you shouldn't hesitate to reach out to us, and we're here to help you.
No one who's watching this is a blatant someone who's breaking lots of copyright law. They're all wanting the best.
Brian, if I can, as I said earlier, Hope's not big in the recording side of the industry, but there's a big difference between how the performers, the artists get paid, and the songwriters get paid. And so when you say, people aren't making much money off of Spotify, there's a big difference between how much the artists make, the performance artist makes, versus the songwriter. And just it's a variant of the original DPD rule, which, you know, when iTunes first came out and they said, we're going to sell a song for 99 cents, right? Digital download off of iTunes.
Yep.
They only cleared it with the Circle P. They only went to the sound recording person and said, we'll pay you 70 cents on the dollar. Basically, this is all rough information, right?
Sure.
And then the Circle P was responsible for paying the Circle C. And they only, because it's a fixed rate, the mechanical rate by law, it's 9.1 cents. So the songwriter, out of that 70 cents that the Circle P got 9.1 cents, or the copyright owner. So there's a big difference there. But then you turn around and you look at radio play.
Yeah, yeah.
And on the radio, you guys correct me if I'm got this mixed up, but the performer is not getting anything from the performance licensing of the ASCAP and type radio licenses. It just goes to the songwriters. Is that correct?
Yeah, for terrestrial radio. The digital radio is paying performers.
Okay. The terrestrial radio. So
there's a difference between digital and
yeah,
and radio. Oh my God.
So it's, you know, obviously neither one sounds fair to me. So when you say, you know, no one's happy with copyright law, yeah, well, depending on which part you're talking about, you can find
right.
things that you're not happy with.
Wow.
But so I do think that all in all, the idea from the publishers and the performers and the songwriters is to try and unite together ourselves to propose things that make sense for everybody involved and is fair to everyone involved.
Yeah.
But I think, as Alex said, right now, the main goal is to let's let the Music Modernization Act take effect and get the MCL running, and let's see what happens.
So we're near the end of our time. So at the end of every one of these conversations, I ask everyone the same thing. It's if you had a magic wand and you could just change anything you wanted about the current copyright system with the flick of your wrist, just one thing, what would you change? So maybe we'll go in reverse order of how we did the introductions. So Jonathan, maybe you can go first, and then Kyle and Alec, and then we'll end with Scott. So magic wand time.
Well, just one, huh?
Yep, you got to choose. It's like a genie, except they're not as powerful because they only get one.
I think, you know, for me, you know, because of who we deal with, what our main purpose is, you know, songs for the church. I try to find a way to simplify it. It's just way too complicated for the everyday user to understand, to know, you know, they want to use a song, first finding who they need to go to, and then trying to figure out what kind of license they need to ask for. It's really complicated. So I think probably my one thing would be to simplify the whole process for the end user.
You fill out a Google form and you're done.
In a perfect world.
All right, Kyle, what about you with your magic wand?
I think right now, since we mentioned, you know, all of these different organizations that are looking after particular components of copyright, you know, ASCAP, BMI, now this mechanical licensing collective, all of the different publishers, there's not a lot of great communication among all these different parties. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would say, you know, the data's out there, it's perfect, and people can search this easily with a convenient database. You know, it's been something that, you know, that all of these players have been working on for years now. So, you know, if we could fast track that, that would be incredible.
And I would say simplify. Just make it as easy as possible, as Jonathan and Kyle said, to for folks who want to use music to do the right thing, to find what they need, to have it be affordable and easy for them.
And I obviously do a lot of the same things every day that Kyle does, because I'm with him. Getting all the information correct in all the various organizations is a major challenge. As an example, one license 2 years ago had all of the Hope hymnody in its database, pretty easily identifiable. When the streaming license came out, all of a sudden, one license was covering our product, not just our hymns. They were covering our choral music, our handbell music, our keyboard music.
Right.
And people started saying, well, we can't find it in the database. So they started submitting it. Before we knew it, we had over 700 submissions that we had to go through. And it happened just as soon as the streaming licenses started. To this day, 18 months into COVID, I do it first thing every morning, and there's usually 20 to 30 new song submissions. And it's because it's not even our active products. Someone is using one of our first keyboard books we ever produced from the early 1960s, and they're just reporting every song that's in it. And we've actually the arranger of all that music is deceased. The product was discontinued and returned to him, and so we have no idea even where to send people to, because it's his heirs now that we haven't had any contact with in 30 years. But you still have to respond. You can't just ignore it. You have to go in and say, no, we don't own this anymore. You got to try and track down who it would be, and I can't even give them much help. So it's just, if I could wave my wand and have all of our historical data in one license, I would be very happy.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for being a part of these copyright conversations. If you're out there listening, we hope to have at least one more of these before we have a more robust in-person gathering. Of course, COVID, we've got to see how all that shakes out. But thank you all so much for taking the time. Thank you for what you do in this industry and in this ministry of congregational song. What you do is so very important. And I know that I'm thankful for all of you and the work that you produce and the work that you do. And I think we can all be grateful that Clara, was pretty good today. This is pretty good for a 3-month-old. So she's already getting the full Zoom experience here. It's 21st century baby.
Thank you so much, Brian, for giving us the opportunity, for bringing us all together, for asking these important questions. And hopefully folks come through this feeling a little bit more clear. We'll have achieved at least one of our goals.
All right. Thanks, everybody.